Welcome to our second episode of the St. Vincent de Paul Mission of Waterbury program on homelessness, one of the core features, services that St. Vincent de Paul provides. My name is David Howe, and I am the clinical director for the St. Vincent de Paul. I'd like to introduce Letitia, who is a member of our panel, Bonnie Cocciola, who is the coordinator for the Society of Support, Julia Santiago, a case manager for the Society of Support, and Jared Brusas, who is the manager of the shelter. In our last show, we did describe some of the circumstances that are in the homeless experience, how people get labeled as homeless, as addicts, and so on. And we're going to talk more about what that means and what that amounts to. The shelter here in Waterbury has a capacity of 120 beds and is the largest single homeless shelter in the state of Connecticut, accepting referrals from other areas as they're needed. What our core topic is now is, this episode is going home. We want to talk about what the experience is at the shelter and how our combined services work toward finding people a home when they're done. So I guess I'd like to go back to the topic of the stigma and stereotypes that people face, that a person is homeless, they're lazy, they can't do anything. What is that? Is that accurate? Is that when you said that people can't work, they should be working? Comments on that one?
People are homeless for a lot of different reasons, and there's a lot of reasons why people don't have the resources or the financial resources to secure or maintain housing and become homeless. There's a lot of negative stereotypes and misconceptions about people who are experiencing homelessness, and some people just think, oh, well, they just need to be able to get a job, or if they would just stop drinking or using drugs, they would be able to, afford or maintain their housing, or if they would just, take their medication as prescribed, they would be fine. But the reality is people do have some significant barriers and challenges, and, people need help. People struggle.
While we were off camera, Letitia, you mentioned what it was like. More than half of the people in the shelter program experience mental health, emotional, or substance use problems.
Yes, I was one that had depression, and it's severe depression, and I felt like I couldn't even work. I felt like in the beginning of my depression, I didn't want to. I wasn't motivated, and I just couldn't get out and work. But I knew I needed for housing.
Okay. Bonnie?
And a lot of times, people suffering from mental health issues, they can work one day and the next day they may not be able to. So a steady job may not be something they can do. A steady income may not be something that they can keep up with.
So I've heard mental health being referred to as an invisible disability, that it doesn't show. But that it can be just as much effect on a person as any kind of physical disability that's more obvious. A person seated in a wheelchair is more apparent that they're going through something. So take me through this. If a person is referred, Julia, you did a lot of admissions, helping people become admitted. If a person is referred to the shelter through, you said, the 211 system, and then there's a number of steps, what do they encounter when they come into the St. Vincent shelter?
So the person seeking shelter will first call 211. We do have it streamlined that way so that we can make sure that we're accurate with the amount of people who are coming in. When they call 211, they do go through an assessment with the operator, and then they call to make sure that we have the space available.
Okay. So the vacancy, it has to be space.
Yes.
Is that how some people come in from out of the area? I know that the shelters in New Haven or Hartford if they're full, will somebody be referred if we have space here in town?
Yes, if we have space, then yes, any guest from anywhere is more than welcome.
Now, it's important that you just use the word guest so that people who are using the shelter, you refer to them as guests.
I think that's important, David, to call them guests. It gives people dignity. Think about when guests are at your home. Typically, when somebody comes to your house for dinner or might spend a weekend from out of town, the expectation of hospitality and service is different than somebody that you have a contracted service for that might be considered a client. And so we use the term guest because it has a warmer approach, a warmer feel, a more personal feel to the work that we do, and honors the inherent dignity of the human person, the person that we're working with, the person that's experiencing homelessness.
I'm going over to this side now. Letitia, you described how much confusion and how much difficulty there is. And Bonnie, you described last time we spoke about how unwelcome people can be. How does that work out when you say hospitality on this side and how much unwelcome people encounter when they're, walking around in the streets? Either lady could.
Well, it's important. They're already in a shelter for a reason. They're already facing a challenge. We don't want to add to any challenge. We want to help. We want to be there for whatever they're facing.
It's really sad and quite depressing that they can't physically and mentally and stability put it all together.
Okay, so it's a very difficult situation
Yeah.
to find yourself in.
Mm-hmm.
Julia, you made comments about that too.
Yes, so during the day when, they're not in the shelter and they face the challenges of, they can't be somewhere because they're loitering or, they can't get service because they don't have the means to get something that they need. At the end of the day when they have to check into the shelter, and our staff is who's there to welcome them as the guests that they are and we're their family and they're coming home basically to, somewhere where they feel safe and comfortable and like they can rely on us to be there for them when they need it.
So there's a welcome that's part of the service that's important to a peer person. So if you've felt unwelcome during the day, somebody's glad to see you.
Yes.
When you come in at the end of the day. And I know you've worked many long shifts.
Yes.
At the shelter. Jared mentioned that, we mentioned in the last episode that up to 30% or 40% of people either have chronic health conditions, asthma, heart disease, amputation, seated in a wheelchair, that use the shelter. What is it for medical services that are provided?
We have a great program that's a partnership, a strong partnership and collaboration between our partners at Stay-Well through the Open Arms program and the medical providers that they provide to our participants in the licensed medical office that we have in our shelter provides really the gateway to medical care and services for those people in our shelter experiencing homelessness. We have a great relationship. It's been a long relationship to really ensure that the guests that are with us have access to good quality health care. David, we know that a lot of our participants, because they're in their housing crisis, their main focus may not always be on their health. Mm-hmm. And they're focused on where am I going to find a roof over for my head or where am I going to find my next meal. So when they come to us, when our guests are received, we do encourage them to get access to good quality medical care and treatment so that anything that illnesses they may have kind of pushed off to the side are being treated, addressed, so that we can really focus on the well-being of the whole person.
So you've mentioned Stay-Well, which is here in the community. In the purely physical medical health, there's St. Mary's Hospital, Waterbury Hospital.
There's a number of medical providers that we can refer to. We happen to have the relationship with Stable where they utilize office space, and we have a
So they actually come into the center.
correct. We have a licensed medical facility, a room that's licensed by the state of Connecticut and by the City of Waterbury's Department of Public Health, where our guests have direct access to medical care and treatment at our facility.
A nurse or a physician's assistant or
Correct.
APRN.
Yep, they come in and they provide treatment there.
Mental health and substance abuse affects the lives of more than half of the people that use the service. Is there a combination for, and Letitia, what you'd mentioned was that you had experienced terrible depression, which may have been part of the helplessness, but maybe something that you've encountered before. But the idea, what happens with mental health when a person is in that spot?
With mental health, it's scary because you're going through an emotional change, and on top of it, you're feeling kind of closed in because you don't have a stable house to go to every day.
So having a mental health or emotional struggle and then being without a place to be anchor.
A double effect.
It's a double effect.
Yep.
Yeah. So the stresses make it worse rather than easier.
Yes.
Okay.
Well, I can also imagine that must be hard getting to appointments and getting rides and not having stability for all that to come into place.
I think it's important to point out what Letitia's sharing is that there's a need for services for people who have behavioral health challenges. And one of the things that the mission, St. Vincent de Paul Mission of Waterbury is doing is rising to the occasion to ensure that our participants at the shelter have access to that care and service that they need. So we have brought in providers who are able to provide therapy and treatment and services in-house. Where our guests are at, and they come as they are and are able to be seen by licensed therapists who provide great treatment to our guests, but also the people who have substance use disorders as well.
Okay.
We do see that people do have some challenges, and we want to make sure that their needs are met. And if we can do that in-house as much as possible with the support of our community partners, we try to do that. And another one of the ways in which the mission has risen to the occasion to meet the needs of our participants is with bringing in a licensed drug and alcohol therapist to provide direct services at the shelter where the guests are to ensure that their needs are met.
So the society provides counselor, substance use counselors, mental health counselors. If they can't do all the program there's connections to other organizations?
Well, the mission, yes. So, right. So the St. Vincent de Paul Mission of Waterbury has people in-house where we've signed memorandums of understanding with other service providers who will utilize our facility to meet with our guests to provide the direct service.
Okay.
So they're not employees of the mission. However, they work with us and work very closely with our participants to give them the services that they need. And then for those that choose not to utilize the in-house services, there's a number of service providers in our community that we do refer to and do provide a linkage with our guests who choose a different service provider. It's all about our guests' choices.
So people have choices. So it's, for example, Department of Mental Health and Addiction Services, there's a connection there.
Absolutely.
What's the other, is it Wellmore?
We have Wellmore, Stay Well. And
Stay Well.
St. Mary's Behavioral Health.
St. Mary's Hospital.
Behavioral Health.
Waterbury Hospital.
Yeah, and these are just to name a few. I mean, there's many in the community that we refer to. It's not just limited to this couple that we're sharing now, but there's a number of community partners that work with our participants who have behavioral health concerns or substance use disorders or both, and some health challenges.
I think it was Julia that said last time that it takes a village. So there's lots of people put together in that mix to provide the services. I know we have limited time. The day at the shelter, I know that in the winter months, more people can stay longer. But in the summer months, it's not a home that people can stay in all day. But coming back in, I was curious what that is about. I happen to say I was down at the shelter and I saw a guy who worked for the shelter coming outside with sandwiches to people around the sidewalk. Is that part of the services that the shelter does?
Yes, we
Yes,
provide sandwiches to them because the soup kitchen, they serve them lunch until I think about 1 o'clock. And so dinner time for the men especially isn't until 7. And so in the meantime, if we get donations of sandwiches, we can always give them something to supplement their hunger until dinner is served at the shelter.
Because a person that's on the street doesn't have access any other way, but the shelter will, go through the door and hand out sandwiches.
Yes.
That's important.
I've had a couple of opportunities where I was able to work an overnight shift, and I was surprised by the number of participants that would come seeking sandwiches throughout the night that weren't guests at the shelter. We're the only place that I know of in the city of Waterbury that has something to eat, something to provide people who are hungry in the middle of the night. People in the city of Waterbury know that St. Vincent's is always open. We never close our doors at the shelter. And if they need a sandwich, we're always open 24/7. They come down, sometimes 3 o'clock in the morning, 5 in the morning, and we'll grab a sandwich to eat.
I'd like to spend a few minutes talking about the housing process, about a person going from emergency shelter services, because it's really an emergency service that the shelter provides, to finding a home. Letitia, you did mention before kind of the process that you, if I can recall, it was you were going from couch to couch.
I was going from couch to couch, family member to friends, and then
A few months at the shelter.
a few months at the shelter, and then St. Vincent's called me on the phone. My therapist actually talked to a member of St. Vincent's.
Okay. And so St. Vincent's organization, well, even after you'd left the shelter for the time being, staying with a friend, you were invited to a housing program that St. Vincent's
Yes.
offered. Okay. Now, we have housing specialists here. Can you tell us about sort of the experience of of helping a person find a home? Because I don't want to call it a house, because everybody else would have a home. What is the steps and what's involved?
Calling initially that 211 phone call really starts the process. And then after that, Bonnie can explain more.
A person is placed on a list, and that's how we get our program participants. And they select their own housing wherever they want in the city of Waterbury. There is some financial, guidelines, but we help people with disabilities and who are homeless. And St. Vincent's provides a lot of times their furniture, security deposit, clothing.
So
Food.
a person who has nothing, St. Vincent's will
Help
work
furnish.
to provide furniture, clothing, and the materials that you need to start a
Yes.
home. Okay.
We try to start with the housing first model. So once you get the housing, we try to put everything else in place.
So once a person has housing or a home, then you build around that.
Correct.
But getting them into that home is what matters.
Yes.
I'm very conscious of Puerto Rico and the catastrophic effects of the hurricane. Did St. Vincent's participate?
We did, and just like we always do in major events. One of the great things that I love working about St. Vincent de Paul Mission of Waterbury is how we are able to give back to the community above and beyond what we already do on a daily basis. And one of the ways in which we've done this is really reaching out to our partners at the Hispanic Coalition and offering our assistance and our services to say, hey, we're open, we're willing to support the participants at your organization and agency that they were working with that were specifically displaced from Hurricane Maria. And thankfully, we were able to provide the seed money for at least one of the families who was in the area and had a fairly large family with some significant issues and challenges. And without the support of the mission, they would have remained homeless. And that's what we do. And we do it well. We provide what we can and where we can. And Hurricane Maria was just another example of the mission doing what it does at its best.
Okay. And you know, Connecticut has a very substantial and active Latino community, and I think that I've heard that, the outreach. Actually, you do deliberately make sure you have multicultural and bilingual staff in all of the locations. Is that correct?
Yeah, it's important, David, to make sure that our staff reflect the cultures that we serve. And so we want a diverse group of staff, professionals that really represent the communities that they serve in. And I think we do a fairly good job of making sure that we have strong representation, making sure that our guests feel welcome, accepted, and comfortable with the staff that we have.
One of the things that I'm hearing about is the amount of programming that is either offered or planned. And Julia had mentioned that vocational preparation had been done for some people at the programs. Is that?
Job searching is important. Just preparing them and, you know, what they can do and kind of, I guess, not training, but just prepping them and letting them know, giving them guidelines or tips on, you know, what they can do and where they can go, referrals.
So helping a person get, if not helping a person with the specific vocational tasks, but helping with job seeking skills and readiness, work readiness skills?
Mm-hmm. We want to connect them to the community as much as possible so that they can obtain their goals, so that they can get entitlements if they need entitlements, get the job that they've always hoped they can do, provide stability in the community and become successful.
Becoming successful in the community. So the goal of the mission of St. Vincent de Paul is to help people move past the services that are offered in the mission. Now, volunteers. What kind of supports and volunteers are provided, or people reach out? I understand Taft School and a number of churches have been part of this. Is there you said
Westover.
Okay, what kind of role does that kind of volunteer play at the shelter?
I think that it's a tremendous help. The schools in particular, they do bring meals, which then makes it easier on the other branch of our mission, the soup kitchen, who provides meals every single day for all of our guests. And so it kind of just gives them a chance to catch up, because then they also service the other community who are not in the shelter.
One of the things that I would point out is that we will do another program on the soup kitchen, but it serves 250,000 meals a year.
Yes.
To free of charge to people in the community. So the idea then that schools, and who are some of the, I'd like to recognize some of the organizations that have
Sacred Heart does a lot of the sandwiches too, right?
Sacred Heart, they also provide meals, dinners for us on a regular basis. Taft School, Chase Collegiate. There's a number of other faith communities, church groups that come and they provide meals on an ongoing basis, but also serve the meals too, which helps making sure that everybody has a nice hot meal to eat. But we may not always have the staff to be able to serve all of those meals, right? It's a lot to serve about 100 and some odd people a day. So we use the volunteers quite a bit every day. There's always opportunities for volunteers. We encourage volunteers. We encourage different groups and organizations to come and share their time and their talents with us. because we rely heavily on the volunteers that do such a tremendous job with the participants at our shelter.
Well, now you've mentioned Sacred Heart, you've mentioned Taft, you've mentioned Westover, you've mentioned other, schools and universities that are part of it. I understand Yale Divinity School is going to offer a connection now to the St. Vincent's program. What do you think those young people get out of participating? Well, maybe the senior volunteers too, but particularly young people. What does that do for them to be part of this?
It's such a learning experience. It's a great way for them to get connected to what is really happening in our community. I know that's how I got started as a social worker.
As a young person?
Yes.
And we have a gentleman in the community who is also a social worker with one of the agencies that we work with, and he'll gladly tell you that the seeds were planted very young when he and his dad used to go to the shelter every Thursday night and serve dinner, and it was those experiences as a young kid that really formed him well and had allowed him to have a great love for the work of social work and a love of the poor and the homeless and people experiencing some of these challenges, and he does tremendous great work in the community. So having young people there we love. We enjoy having them there. They're really the backbone of the work that we do there.
And that affects the future.
Absolutely.
That affects the future. So having people become connected to that. Well, at this point, I guess I'd like to, let me do this. How can you help? You can go to the St. Vincent de Paul Mission of Waterbury website to support the organization. Please like us on social media to become aware of events and programs. Individuals and organizations can sponsor donation drives. The mission website has lists of items which are needed. Now that includes things like bus passes, gift cards, clothing. Individual or organizations can volunteer a variety of skills. Painting in our facilities is one thing, but also quality of life skills, art, literacy skills, yoga are the things. So there's really opportunities to become involved with the organization that serves so many of the people here in our community. So I'd like to thank our guests, our panelists. I'd like to thank Letitia.
Thank you.
I'd like to thank Bonnie Cocciola, coordinator for the Society of Support. Julia Santiago, case manager and longtime member of the shelter community, and Jared Brusas, who is the shelter director. Any closing remarks?
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.